Our next bill is House Bill 4624, Gender Reassignment Procedures.
As to define gender, sex, and other terms, to prohibit the provision of gender transition procedures to a person under 18 years of age, to provide exceptions to prohibit the use of public funds for gender transition procedures, and to provide penalties so as to prohibit public school staff and officials from withholding knowledge of a minor's perception of their gender from the minor's parents, among other things.
I'm ready with a notebook if y'all have any questions.
One of those important legislative protections that has come to pass is to protect minors from so-called gender transition procedures.
This bill is based on fear of the unknown, uneducated opinion, and some definitions of religious morality.
The makeup of the board indicates that nothing I say will matter.
So that 60% regretting quote, you don't have the source for that?
I believe it. I believe the 60 Minutes program talked about that. I'm
So
not
your
sure
source
if that
is
was the
60
study.
Minutes?
Well,
Yeah, it took me a long time to get over that macho-ness and say, all right, this is the right path. I mean, it took a lot of her convincing me it was the right path, and us talking and reading and researching and finding out that it actually is only 1% of people detransition, not 60 or 70% that was spoken earlier.
I wanted to do a little myth busting here today. Number one, there is no gender confirmation surgery occurring here in minors in South Carolina. None.
There have been concerns raised about medications used for young transgender children without parental involvement and consent. This does not happen. I will repeat, this does not happen.
Refusing the availability of hormone blockers to those under the age of 18 is a clear misunderstanding of the science of their crucial functionality.
Medications are not involved in the care of transgender youth until the age of puberty.
Like many other teens in this state, all 4 of my children have typical teenage concerns. However, legislators are only concerned with the daily health care of my trans child. What I wish is that the co-sponsors of these kinds of bills would talk to parents, would talk to us, and understand exactly what the process is.
But I've lived this. I really wish everybody on this subcommittee would make eye contact with me because this is my child I'm talking about.
Listen to the parents, listen to the doctors. You're dictating the practice of medicine, and there is malpractice involved in what you're prescribing.
These kids, whether or not you allow them to have gender-affirming care, they continue to be transgender. You cannot stop them from being transgender.
And it was having access to HRT and having affirmative care that finally put me in a position in life where I could be comfortable and happy with myself.
While I don't know what it's like to be a trans youth who received that medically necessary care, I do know what it was like to not receive it. Because my parents refused that care, puberty caused permanent, irreversible damage to my body, and it caused me to experience a much harder life than I would have otherwise. And by the way, parents still have the right to deny that treatment to their children.
As my 8-year-old son puts it, I was born with a girl body, but a boy heart, a boy mind, a boy soul. Hurts my heart to think that there are kids today who could have access to that care that I didn't have access to as a kid, and that would now have that taken away from them.
This whole suggestion of a transgender ideology, like it's some nasty thing that's going on.
When I was 11 years old, I was falsely outed by a school teacher to my family before I was ready. My grandfather, a local church leader, picked up the phone. "I think Alyssa is a lesbian," said my teacher. "So what?" boomed my grandfather and slammed down the receiver.
I'm trying to make sense of this data because I got a room full of people citing studies that contradict what you're saying.
As someone who's lost a really close trans loved one to suicide, I can tell you it takes us in the wrong direction.
When my brother Knox came out as transgender 5 years ago, it was certainly not a result of peer pressure. It didn't make him more popular, he didn't make a bunch of new friends, and he didn't fit in better with the friends that he did have. For the most part, he was alienated from his peers.
I was able to protect 4 kids pounding at my door running from a shooter, but I am struggling to protect my own kid from bills from our state legislatures.
And this proposed piece of legislation will do harm to real South Carolina families. It is absolutely shameful.
Just a couple days ago, we were explaining to my daughter that we were coming here about this bill. And she asked us point blank why you all don't believe her, or why people don't believe her. She knows who she is.
It is unfortunate that here we are again, that politicians are interjecting themselves into the personal freedoms of families and citizens in this state.
We should not be taking away freedoms. We're South Carolina, y'all. We're supposed to be fighting for freedom.
As long as you attempt to legislate and oppress the people of this state, I'll be here to fight you for their freedoms.
This is not the legitimate business of government.
My parental rights should not be taken advantage of by the state of South Carolina.
There's no room for government in these conversations.
The Fourth Appellate Circuit is the judicial body that governs South Carolina and has a history of respecting the privacy and autonomy of transgender individuals.
The question is why the majority party pursuing such a harmful policy that is directed against such an incredibly small population. I'd posit it's because the majority party has become a victim of your own success. After 20 years of single-party rule, the majority party has ceded to control to its most extreme wing and its most harmful impulses.
We're in the midst of a teacher recruitment and retention crisis here in South Carolina. This is really not the time to burden teachers with unethical and harmful requirements.
And as nurses, and we know we have a shortage in this state. To ask us to violate half of who we are we going to be actually bringing more nurses who want to be here?
What is the purpose of Medicaid if not to ensure the health and well-being of taxpayers, no matter their gender identity?
The thing I want to mention is the outing provision. If that were to remain in this legislation, children would be abused. Children would be made homeless.
Unfortunately, many children are not supported by their parents, and they're the ones that show up in the ICUs and in the ERs.
I know students who will be harmed by this. We have glaring problems in South Carolina for kids. Childhood hunger, gun violence, poor mental health. Why are we spending the first day of the legislative session going after a couple thousand kids tops and their medically necessary care?
And so if you make it illegal, you're really getting rid of mental health therapists for gender non-conforming children all the way around.
That when you take away the one positive option that these kids and their families have, you leave them with some awful, awful options.
How are these two studies, or the Trevor Project might have multiple studies, in the study that you're talking about, offering up contradicting results?
It's so funny to be able to hear all of these people get up here and tell you their stories. And it's just bouncing off most of you.
But know that South Carolina's trans kids are all watching you today. We are afraid. I ask that you please protect us, not from the imagined boogeyman, but from this harmful legislation. We deserve a life without abuse and harm, and you can do something about that.
If a student gave me that information and was not ready to tell their parents, if they were, I would sit there with them and do it. If they were not, I would give up my license and run for this office to stop this BS.
The most important thing that this bill does is take away hope.
There's a motion to favorably recommend to the full committee for the bill as amended. We'll call the roll.
Mr. Beach?
Aye.
Ms. Davis? Aye. Mr. Moore?
No.
Ms. Petalino? Yes. Mr. Sessions?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
The bill passes favorably as amended.
Shame on all of you.